So as you can see, I usually prefer to 1 to 2 pumps on the jack under the mounting puck, just to get some pressure off the wheel, and then I break it free with the breaker bar. The reason I do that is A, when you jack it up just a little bit, tire's still on the ground, the contact point's still on the ground, but just a couple of pumps of that release some of the pressure on the bolts. Easier to break, I think, and also I think it's a little bit safer when you're trying to even just break the tension of the bolts. Having some extra point of safety there is good. That's just my method of doing it. But okay, so let's go ahead and take these 5 lug bolts off. And I just put my feet on the bottom, one hand up here for the last bolt, because when it breaks free, the wheel is just on the hub and you don't want it to fall off and scratch the inside of your wheel. And you kind of see the wheel start to be free there, so always make sure you got 3 points of contact, otherwise you could drop your wheel on the hub and scratch it. So let's pull this bad boy off, like so. And now we're out of the way. Okay, so once the wheel's off, where's my flashlight? There it is, my pen light. So, best practice is to take a wire brush and kind of wire in and out of the threaded areas. Now I will say, this car is only a few months old. I just hit 3,000 miles on the car. So it's a pretty new car, so it doesn't have years of salt or water or snow, which some people have, which is not a problem for me here in Florida. But if you do have that, salt can cause corrosiveness where these threads meet the hub here. But regardless, there's a little bit of a standard buildup rust from standing water or what may be. So take a little bit of a wire. This is just a brass wire brush. I'm just cleaning out the inside of the threads, like so. So they are clean, and what that does, it allows the thread lock to adhere better. So that looks good, and then I'm actually going to take a little bit of compressed air and blow the inside of it out. And then around the actual hub ring itself is pretty clean. No rust, no buildup. So that is very, very clean. So we're good there. All right, so now take our studs from Motorsport Hardware. So I actually, shake this up for a second. It says use blue thread locker. I do have thread locker blue and red. For those of you that know, blue is removable, red is not, or it takes a lot to remove it. However, I've never used orange, but orange is supposed to be high strength removable with the removability of blue, but the strength of red. So it's like a hybrid. So I'm gonna try that. Get a little bit more security and strength with the studs being on there. And it's removable with, I assume, maybe a little bit of a heat or something of that nature, which is pretty normal. All it takes, standard thread locker, is just a little drop across the threads. That's plenty. And then make sure the threads are lined up and they're running through. And what I like to do is run it by hand all the way until it just stops right there, and then run it back about halfway and then run it back in. And that kind of runs the threads through their course, no pun intended. And Make sure the thread locker gets pushed around to all the threads evenly, or at least as best as possible. I've just always done that. Seems to work pretty well. So this is actually a 14 by 1.25 to 14 by 1.5 conversion. So the threads on the hub side are 14 by 1.25, but the threads on the nut side are 14 by 1.5. So what that does is it gives you a coarser thread, easier on-off, easier removal, all that good stuff, which I kind of like that. So this is a, I believe 4mm, or 5, excuse me, hex socket. So take my 3/8 ratchet here. Actually, let me close this thread locker before I spill this whole thing on the ground. Okay, so 3/8, let's go ahead and snug this up a little bit. The hub may turn, which is fine. So typical, I think, time that the Loctite kind of starts to get sticky is about 20 minutes. Full cure is about 24 hours. Snug these up. So you want to make sure you torque these down relatively quickly. All right, grab my torque wrench. This is going to be 25 foot-pounds. Lock that in place. You may have to get an angle down here so you don't smack your bumper. So your rotor may turn. You can just grab a hold of it. Make sure that's all the way in. Rotate this up. So now we'll grab our spacer, and this is of course the 12.5mm for the front, 15mm for the rear. And then best practice here is put on some anti-seize just behind the spacer to where it sits on the hub. That way next time you take it off, it comes off easy. Just basically right here behind the hub and kind of that main contact point right there. Doesn't take much. You don't have to smear it all on there. And now take a little bit on this main contact point with my finger. Run it up through here. And that's all it takes. Don't need to go crazy with it. Throw this glove away. So now we'll take our 12.5mm, which is cool. So ECS tuning, it doesn't matter. I mean, it's hub centric, right? These wheels are hub centric. The spacers are hub centric, which just means that it's centered around the hub as a focal point versus lug centric, to where there's a space between the hub and the wheel or the spacer, and it's centered on the lugs. So, but what's cool is it doesn't matter which way they go on. It's drilled out with 10 holes either way. I think more so it's just for weight savings. I mean, it's easier on and off, like a race application. You can line it up whichever way, but also saves weight, less rotational mass, which is cool for race application. But anyways, so that just slides on like this. Really nice, really secure fit, right around the hub. That sits nicely. So now we can grab our wheel. What's nice about this is it makes it a lot easier to put your wheels back on when you have studs. Slides right on, like so. So now we're gonna take our black race nuts, Ford's race nuts, and start these by hand. I'm actually gonna use the socket and put it on by hand. And I did kind of notice that these threads are a little, I mean, they're coarser threads, but they're a little rough to go on at first. So definitely wouldn't want to use my impact to put these bad boys on. And they even say not to use pneumatic air guns or electric when installing these nuts. So I mean, I do have electric impact wrenches, but I probably won't be using them on this application. You always want to do this hand tight first. just to make sure it's level. You know, I want to make sure that the spacer is obviously sitting on the hub. The wheel is all the way on the hub. There's no wiggle back and forth. It's fully flush. And then what I like to do is grab my breaker bar just to get a little more leverage on here. Just to tighten it a little more than I could by hand, obviously, just until the wheel starts to move. Just to fully seat it in place before I lower the car and torque it down. And what I'll even do is when I do that, I'll lower it just a little bit, just until the tire makes contact, not all the way down. And then I'll tighten it even more. Now that the tire is actually on the ground, once those are tight, we'll grab the torque wrench. I'll run this all the way to the ground. Once that's all the way to the ground. And this is the G80 M3 obviously, so 101 foot-pounds. Always keep in a star pattern. And that's it. Okay, so as you just saw, I've got the spacers and stud conversion kit installed. 12.5 in the front, 15 in the rear, and the 14 by 1.25 to 14 by 1.5 conversion for the studs. First of all, I've had no issues with rubbing. I know a lot of things I saw on the forums and other people's videos where people were having rubbing issues on the front two wheels. 12.5 or anything over 12, people said that you might see rubbing with stock height, and of course my suspension is still stock, obviously. I've had no issues with the 12.5s, even with the Pirellis. I know Pirellis do stick out. They're a fatter tire than the Michelin, but I've had no issues with rubbing at all, even with the wheel being full tilt. So that's good. And I'll actually cut the car on, turn the wheel, and show you guys. Okay, so wheel is full tilt. So from what I understand, and I wasn't sure when looking at this in the forums and online what exactly people were talking about with the tires rubbing, but I'll show you guys. So when the front wheel is fully turned in like this, the outside of the wheel would actually catch these fins, as you can see, and I've got probably a quarter of an inch, maybe an eighth of an inch, and that's the wheel at, or the tire, excuse me, at full tilt. And especially in reverse, when the tire would go in reverse, it would kick up these fins and snap them off, and then when the tire is going forward, it would just kind of rub the fins. And there is an aftermarket when you combine I and D for about $1,000, but for now, you know, 12.5 millimeter spacers in the front on the stock Pirelli stock height, I've had zero issues, and I've actually tried to make them rub, and there's been no issues at all. So, anyways, so that's what you would look out for if you're concerned with rubbing, or where it would rub is, you know, put the kit on, turn the wheel all the way, and you can manually see if it would rub there or not. But I think it looks awesome. I think 15s in the rear is pretty much spot on. I mean, it doesn't get any more flush than that. And of course, 12.5 in the fronts look good. So once I get the suspension put on and get it dropped down, we'll see how that looks. It may be a little too much, because I don't want any rubbing. You know, I've got my wife that rides with me a lot, and, you know, my little son. So that's important to have an actual payload amount and not just to have the lowest possible car. So that's important to me. But when I get the suspension put on the next month or so, I'll do an update video with you guys with the same setup, because I'll have the same tires obviously in the next month. I shouldn't burn through them, maybe, who knows. But it should be the same setup with a suspension, and then I'll do an update video and I'll let you guys know if there's any rubbing or issues there. But other than that, pretty easy install. As you can see, this is everything stock. Suspension stock, wheels are stock, just the spacers and stud conversion. So Pretty easy install, and that's kind of the look you get, and you guys saw from the B-roll just a couple minutes ago, but it looks good for me. But the front, I mean, it's got to get a little bit lower. It's just ridiculous. The back looks pretty good actually from where it sits, but the front is obnoxious, so we'll get that lowered. But anyways, thank you for watching. I appreciate it. If you guys have any questions over this, drop me a comment, and stay tuned for the next one. Thanks.